Hey everyone, it's Chris Newman from the spreadsheetguru.com. In this video, I'm going to show you what to do with the VBA code you found on the internet. Now, first, before we get into doing anything, we need to decide one thing. We need to decide if the VBA code is going to be triggered manually or if it's going to be triggered by an event. And what I mean by an event is we could set up the VBA code to run automatically when the Excel file opens or when we change to a specific tab in the spreadsheet. So there's a bunch of different events available to us that we can use to trigger the VBA code to run. We're going to go through both scenarios. I'm going to start with the manual trigger first because that is what 99% of people use when they're running their VBA code. So we'll tackle that first, and then we'll go to how to tie your code to run automatically by an event done on the spreadsheet. So first, before we do anything, we actually need to save our Excel file as a different file type. There's a special file called an XLSM file that specifically holds VBA code. So before we do anything, we're going to go up to File, Save As. I'm just going to save this to my desktop. We're going to change it from an XLSX to the next one down, Macro Enabled Workbook. And I will just call it Book 1. And save that. And we'll see that new file extension up at the top, and we're ready to go. So the VBA code is actually accessed through another window called the Visual Basic Editor. And in order to get to that, you can get there a couple ways. You can go to the Developer tab and hit this Visual Basic button, or you can use the shortcut Alt F11. So if you click on that button, you should see a project pane. If you don't, if I close this, you can use shortcut key Control R, and you'll get that back showing. And what this project pane shows is every Excel workbook that's open on your screen. So you could see if I created a new workbook and went back to the Visual Basic Editor, there would be a Book 1 and a Book 2 showing. So we're going to stay within Book 1, so I'll go close out Book 2 real quick for us. And what we first need to do is insert something called a module, and that's where normal VBA code can be stored, and that's where 99% of people store their code. So we're just going to right-click, go to Insert, and click Module. Now you'll just see a blank page open up where you can type in code or copy-paste code. And you want to make sure you're inside the module, you're not in any of these other things. And a way to tell that is it will say Module 1 up at the top in the title bar. And what we're going to do is actually create a macro before we go to copy the code. So I found some code. I'm actually just going to go to my website. I have kind of a VBA blog. And I'm going to go find some code that's interesting to me. How about we play with removing those pesky page breaks from the spreadsheet. So here I found my code, my VBA code, and it's set up in a way that I can just copy and paste it in. So first what I'm going to do is create a macro. In order to create a macro, you just need to type sub. That's short for subroutine, and then a space, and then give your macro a name. Your macro name cannot have any spaces in it. So I'm going to say turn off page breaks, and then just do a open close parentheses and hit enter. And you'll see end sub is automatically generated for me. And we have now created a macro called turn off page breaks. And what we can do is paste any VBA code we want inside these two lines, and whenever we call turn off page breaks, that code is going to execute. So if I go back to the web, you'll notice in this example VBA code, there's actually a subroutine macro name for me pre-written. Since I didn't want to call my macro disable page breaks, I'm just going to copy the stuff within the two sub lines of code. So I'll copy that and go back to my macro and paste it. And that is all I have to do from a coding perspective. Now, I'm creating a description at the top of your macro code so you remember what the heck the thing does. And comments are triggered by putting an apostrophe in front of the text. And visually it's apparent because the text will be green. So if I wanted to put a comment after this line of code, I could put an apostrophe and type out my comment. And if I click away from that, you see that turns green. So anything green is not executable code. It's just commentary to help folks understand what the code is doing. So highly recommend you at least at a minimum put some sort of description or purpose at the top of the macro just to explain what it's doing. So I am going to save the code and jump out of the Visual Basic Editor. And we can do one of two ways to actually call this code manually. So you can call the macro dialog box. So you can click it within the Developer tab. There's shortcut Alt F8, or it is also in the View tab if you don't have the Developer tab open. So if you click that, if you have a bunch of other workbooks with macros open, you might see a whole list of macros. I like to filter down to this workbook, and you'll see the macro that we created. And if you just hit run, it'll execute that code. What I really like to do is put a button in the spreadsheet to actually run that code. So typically I'll just go insert and do a shape and draw a little button right here. I'll right click edit text, and we can put a descriptive label on this. So we'll say remove page breaks, and I'll do a little text formatting real quick. Get that looking nice and good. And we now have a button. So in order to connect our macro to the button, I need to right click on the button, go to assign macro, and then again navigate to the macro we created called turn off page breaks and hit OK. And now notice whenever I hover over this shape now, it acts and looks like a button, so my cursor changes. So let's see if it actually runs. I'll go put page breaks in here so you can see those dotted lines, those annoying dotted lines, and I'll click remove page breaks and they are magically gone. So that showed me it worked. So that's how you can manually call macros. Let's move on to kind of event-triggered macros. So there's two types of event-triggered macros. There's ones tied to the Excel file level, and there's ones tied to the tab level. So I'm going to put in a couple more tabs in here. So let's do a file level event first. So I'm going to again go back to my Visual Basic Editor. And the events are actually stored in these objects right here. So you can see there's this workbook object, and there's an object for each sheet in the workbook. So if I'm doing any file level stuff, I need to double click this workbook and make sure I'm in that kind of coding area. And to get to the events, I click this first drop down right here, go to workbook. And you'll see it will automatically populate the open event for me. But there's also a bunch of other events I can use to trigger my VBA in this second dropdown. And most of them are pretty descriptive, pretty common sense on what they do. So before print, it'll run it before you actually print. Before close, before you close the file. There's a sheet calculate, so before you calculate a sheet, before you right click. So there's a bunch of different ones. I think most people use the open event to run code or the before close. And you can do one or two things in this. So this is essentially a macro called workbook open, and it's an event macro. And I can come back in here and copy my code and just paste it in there like that. And this code will now run whenever I open this file. Or if I already had that code in there, I could simply say call and go over here and copy the macro name, and it will call that macro for me, so I don't have to rewrite it. So one or two options, that's all you have to do. Now I will say on these event macros, the user, if it's not a trusted document or they don't have their security set up to where macros just will run, they'll get a little prompt that asks them if they want to enable macros before it will run. So that is a kind of a caveat with the event-driven macros. Now if I want to tie it to a sheet, so let's say I want to run this macro every time sheet 2 is activated. So I can go here and click on the second sheet and go to worksheets, and you'll see the selection change auto-populates. If I want to go to activate, I can click the activate and it will put that macro for me in there. And again, I can either copy the code and put it within those two sublines, or I can just do a call. And I'll just delete this since we're not using that. And so this is sheet 2. So I can go here to sheet 2, put those page breaks back on so you can see those dotted lines. I'll come over here to sheet 1, I'll go back to sheet 2, and you can see they just disappeared as I activated sheet 2. So that is how you can hook up macros to run on events in the spreadsheets. Hopefully this video was able to clearly show you how to get that code into your spreadsheets up and running and working for you, and hopefully that gets you on your way. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more Excel related videos, whether it be VBA or Excel tips, make sure you hit that subscribe button below and you'll get notified whenever I post new videos. Thanks for watching.